All right, we're in Jersey City today, and I'm Jeff Brindle, and this is a history of the Commission project. And I'm very fortunate to sit down with former Governor Jim McGreevy. Thank you very much for
No,
sitting down.
thank you. You know what Governor Byrne would always say? He said he wanted to be buried in Hudson County,
Right.
so he could stay active in Democratic politics.
And could vote more, right?
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, I don't know. There might have been an ELEC violation in there somewhere.
Just a little bit of background of the governor. Governor was governor from 2002 to 2004. Served in the Assembly from 1990 to 1992. In the State Senate from 1994 to 1998. And was mayor of Woodbridge in 1991 to 2002. You also hold a Master of Divinity degree. And now are the head of New Jersey Reentry Corporation. And you're also an attorney. Why don't we just start off and tell us a little bit about the Reentry Corporation?
Thank you. Again, you're here with, in Jersey City, we affectionately call it the New Jerusalem, the city on a hill. But what we do is we provide for critically needed services for people that are returning from state prison, from county jail, from addiction treatment, and from the theater of war. And so the whole goal is that understanding that when people come home without an ID, without housing, without food, without a means of income, they're in difficult straits. And so just to think what it would be like for any of us watching this video, or any of us in New Jersey just being dropped into any community in rural, suburban, or urban New Jersey without the benefit of any familial support, financial support, medical support, and also the prospect of employment. You would do what would be required to survive. And that's what's happened too long in terms of reentry, in terms of people literally being released from the prison door. And so we have over 14,000 clients, and we're sitting here in Reverend Boulevard Flores' office, where every day our 82 employees work diligently, assiduously, to make sure that people have those requisite needed services in a coherent and consistent fashion. And I would just say that, that comparing national recidivism trends, I mean, we're doing quite well compared to 66 plus recidivism for NJRC program participants. They're under 10% recidivism. The rearrest rate is about 19.7. Sometimes that's for technical crimes, but the reincarceration rate is under 10%.
Well, I can say that, that's a really important pursuit that
thank you.
You're undertaking, and it says a lot about you.
No, thank you. Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Right. Well, turning to politics a little bit, and going back to 1997, when you first ran for governor, and the conventional wisdom at that time was that.
By the way, Governor Byrne would say that's what he thought was a diverse primary. There was an Irishman from the north, Murphy, from the central, McGreevy, and from the south, Andrews. But anyway.
All Irish.
Yes, exactly.
Right. That's why you have Joe Donahue.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But anyway, you kind of defied the odds, because the conventional wisdom at that time was that if you had a congressional district, you were going to win the primary.
I think, Rob Andrews is an incredibly bright, articulate individual, and he had the South. There were certain fractures, candidly, in that base. I had worked. Rob was more conservative than I was in his voting patterns. He had voted for some aspect of the Gingrich contract. So in areas like in the South, I ran diligently with what I would call communities that were largely on the edge, whether or not they were disenfranchised. Clearly, they were marginalized from the political process. And so we worked really diligently with the African American, the Latino community, the faith-based community, churches, shuls throughout New Jersey, which was a quiet yet organized base of support. I mean, I don't think there was a black church, a synagogue that I did not visit throughout the entirety of South Jersey. And then my family, I didn't have the line in Hudson, but my family's from Jersey City. My parents grew up here. My grandfather was an immigrant here, was a police officer here. And so we had roots there. And then Essex was determinative. At the time, I had, God rest his soul, Calvin West, who was the first elected African-American councilman in Newark. Calvin was like a second father to me, and he was good. Every once in a while, I would want to do Newark politics, to which I was severely reprimanded as being naive and insufficiently practiced or seasoned. But Calvin made sure that the Essex line stayed with me. I mean, there was a time when Steve Adubato in 2001 tried to break it for Torricelli. But Calvin was indefatigable and diligent and helped to preserve our base. So yeah, I didn't have the line. I had Middlesex. Middlesex, candidly, wasn't as robust as it is today under Chairman McCabe's leadership. But I had, if you will, central part of New Jersey, and I can think of people like Chris Bolwich in Union. I can think of going up into some of the more rural areas. Bergen County, I had Loretta's husband. I didn't have Loretta, but I had Loretta's husband. He was, God rest his soul, he was just a blessed memory. He was a great fellow. So it's interesting. And then there's nothing to be taken away from hard work.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this is relationships.
Yes, absolutely. So,
yeah.
And the county
and
party.
Rob was just more rational. He wasn't willing to sit in a Chevy for 14 hours a day. I mean, he had a life.
And the county party organizations.
Yeah, the county party organizations. And it's interesting because you have to be aware of the fact, so Rob had great relationships with his peers in the House. But that doesn't always translate to party line. I mean, so that the county chairman want to exercise their own prerogative. The county chairman, at the end of the day, if Senator Donahue is here and you're the chairman, I mean, the chairman wants to exercise his prerogative, whether it's grappling with issues of appointments, state commissions, judicial appointments, county prosecutors. So there's an interesting tension. People see the county line and they see it's this omnipotent machine where, of mythical proportions where everything is aligned. And, there are tensions. I would argue there are healthy tensions there as well as there should be between elected officials, between appointed officials, and between state and local political hierarchies.
Well, you made a very important point too. That you really have to work hard. I mean, just because you have to pay your dues and you have to work hard.
Exactly, and then people think running for governor. Well, it's just it's a decision you make in an afternoon over a cup of coffee, and it's a life-changing decision. It's if you're going to do it well. Today it's ever more increasingly expensive and onerous, and so it's just that much more sweat equity. But yeah, it's just a tough decision.
Yeah, no, it is, and despite the amount of work that you put into it, just to get the nomination and then to run, and the '97 general election, of course, you lost to Governor Whitman. Very slim margin.
At 11:37 at night. Not that anybody remembers. No, I remember that. I remember that night. In fact, I probably shouldn't say this, but my friend Jennifer Preston, who was writing for the New York Times at that time, showed me the headline of what was to be when at 11:30 it was presumed that I was going to win. And it was obviously heady stuff. But that was my favorite race because we had nothing. I remember there was a wonderful, glorious picture of Governor Whitman in a sequins gown on the front page, top of the fold on the Star Ledger, where she had raised over $1 million. And on the same night, I was at the Island VFW raising like $17,000. And I thought to myself, where am I going? I mean, just I'm raising 17. She was on the front page above the fold with then Speaker Chairman Chuck Hytaian, and it was just, you look at the amounts of money. And even if I could believe that we were right on the message on auto insurance and on property taxes and, early childhood education, be that as it may, if the old bad adage, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one, doesn't make a noise, and I'm paraphrasing it badly, but the point is if we didn't have any money to transmit our message, would there even be an election?
Yeah, but despite the loss, and I can speak to this a little bit because, in 1977, I ran for assembly and lost.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So it's hard to pick yourself up, but you picked yourself
Yeah.
up to run again in 2001.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about that. What does
No,
it
it's
take?
just, it was a great race, and so when you start with the prospect, the prospect of winning was so remote, was so distant, and then to come so close, I would argue, on the merits in the sense of our philosophical positioning on policy issues, and I also would argue that Governor Whitman allowed certain charges to stand, to not be as robustly challenged as I would have. Although Chuck Hytaian had a great, and I told him this, a great flyer at the end of the campaign, literally hitting Friday before the election in '97, saying that Jim McGreevy's urban auto insurance plan will drive prices up precipitously in Ocean and Monmouth County. And I remember trying to get a hold of, we had no way of responding to it that quickly. And we were on some WOBM radio in Ocean County. And I just thought it was, obviously didn't agree with it, and auto insurance had a completely beneficial impact on drivers throughout the state, whether they were rural, suburban, or urban. But I had to appreciate the strategy of it and our inability to effectively respond. So I think that we had a good message. I think that when you come that close, you think about what if. And then I always had a passion for government.
Yeah,
I always,
right.
I saw that New Jersey was well positioned, but I was concerned about our slipping strength in terms of technology, biotech, pharma, telecommunications, then the financial services industry. And if you were to look at Massachusetts and New Jersey, both that had highly leveraged information-based technologies and economies, you would think that one was going to succeed and one wasn't. And it was about making the critical decisions to augment for our future.
Yeah, that was one of your great achievements was the auto insurance, as well as motor vehicles, right?
Yeah, and it was also, Diane LaGreedy, and I should give recognition to Jamie Foxx and the legislature at the time, Speaker Albio Series and Joe Roberts, because it was a team effort. It was understanding that, the market economy, existed worldwide except in Cuba and the New Jersey auto insurance market. And so to bring back some of the realistic market forces to provide for a more responsive market availability to auto insurance. And it was at the time because the auto insurance industry was found New Jersey to be so overfreighted and weighted that there was a reluctance to come back into the New Jersey market. So part of it was which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and part of it was discussing with insurance companies that we needed to get more people into the market in order to drive. And so it was as much shopping our proposals as it was shopping New Jersey. And at the end of the day, we did. Getting Progressive in, getting others in, but I'm still a New Jersey manufacturer.
Right.
Subscriber.
We're speaking with former Governor McGreevy.
Yes,
and
who's shilling for NJM proudly.
Talking about your 2001 run for the governorship, you had created a federal PAC.
Yes.
And one of the things that you did, which doesn't happen a lot these days, is that you disclosed your donors and your expenditures.
Doesn't happen at all these days.
And not too much.
Not
That's one
often.
of the issues that we're
Yeah.
talking about. Now, the transparency obviously didn't hurt you,
Yeah.
right? So how important is transparency in elections and so forth? I mean,
So, it's a great question.
particularly with these independent groups that have.
I think the natural tendency is to not want to disclose. I think the natural tendency is to be fearful of the possible thrust and parry, the attack, the criticism. And I'll only say that it's fair only insofar as if everyone was operating on a level playing field, then it all makes sense. The problem with being, quote unquote, the good guy or the individual who's transparent is that the irony is that you're offering your opponent a potential focus of critical attacks in terms of the disclosure, the
Right.
transparency that he or she is not engaging in. And so the absurdity that the person who's engaging in the most egregious fundraising patterns or habits is ironically the one casting the greatest stones against someone who's trying to be transparent. So when you're making that decision, I remember making that decision. I mean, you have the good government guys, and we're gonna try to do things differently, and we're gonna be good government. But then people rationally said, all right, but part of this is to protect oneself as a rational species impulse, and like, why are you doing what no other has done and aren't you exposing? And so you say to yourself, all right, well, I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do and I'll earn points in the book of life. But there's a credible argument to the contrary.
Sure. Now, of course, this was before you became governor, but in 1993, they had the Rosenthal
Yes.
reforms. And one of the things that they did was that they strengthened political parties significantly by allowing them higher contribution limits, and they could spend as much money as they wanted
I
on their
wonder what
candidates.
Alan would think about where we are today. But
Yeah, I
anyway.
know. Good. He was a good man, very important, and made a lot of contributions to the legislature. He was big on the legislature.
I consider myself a friend, and he was probably having such great foresight and balance and judgment. He was one of the great gifts to New Jersey.
But one of the results of that, of course, when you became governor, the county party organizations were strengthened really significantly. I mean, were the Rosenthal reforms, were they helpful in terms of the county parties and how influential they became?
That's a great question.
And what did you do? What did you do?
I think for governor, it's a mixed bag. For a governor, you want to govern and you want the ability to move forward legislative proposals. You want to move forward a budget. You want the ability to move forward nominations. And if county organizations have either collectively or in part a disproportionate footprint in the legislature against which the governor has to grapple, that becomes problematic. And I can speak for the Democratic side. I mean, you have always had strong organizations in Essex, strong organizations in Camden, strong organizations in Hudson most of the time, and merging in Middlesex as under the leadership of Chairman McCabe. But I think, what mitigated against those strong organizations, ironically, were the individual subdivisions or tensions within those organizations, which ironically, it may have looked like
you always had factions.
Exactly, it may have looked like a monolith from the exterior, but if you did your business well, you knew that the fractures were fast and furious. So I think Alan's proposals were largely sound. I think in retrospect, though, with the rise of dark money, it has become more problematic because if the county organizations are transparent, then that power is good and it's stable and it's known. I think it becomes more of a challenge to the governor's office per se if he or she does not know what they're grappling with.
Yeah, Governor, you kind of anticipated my next question, and one of the things that we've been doing at the Election Law Enforcement Commission is we've proposed that we get disclosure for these independent groups and at the same time strengthen political parties.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think is important or?
Yeah, I
would
think
support?
political, it just, obviously this is the day after the primary and I look at what's happening around the nation and I have to be careful not to project my own personal bias, but I mean, I look at those organizations. I mean, I probably hurt Chris Smith, but I think Chris Smith is so much more of a competent, decent human being than it's just. So organizations, by definition, as opposed to individuals, create a process, and there are more voices. And I think one of the aspects that threaten the stability of American democracy are the fact that individuals per se can self-finance to a degree where they can literally upend the entirety of the process. And I don't think any of our founding fathers, I don't think from the founding of the Federal Election Law Enforcement Commission to ELEC in New Jersey, I don't think anybody envisioned the almost usurious impact of money in terms of this process. And so I think organizations mitigate against the self-financed, ideologically driven campaign.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that may be simplistic. It may not be true in all cases.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
And it's so I always want to lean towards the middle. I mean, so lean towards, as a gentleman in East Brunswick said to me one time, common sense, it's not so common. But I mean, I always try to lean towards the common sense and make it more common. So I think in that sense, county organizations are good. And every once in a while, and I become frustrated with all parties. But in terms of the stability of the republic, I think county organizations are a good thing.
No, I would agree. I think parties in general are important for the electoral process, and they can kind of bring people together. And
Exactly. And I understand that is there. That is there, and I think parties understand. I mean, like even the recent attempt to move beyond party lines, I think, is problematic for me, just because it would argue. I mean, there are times I'm so frustrated with, establishment politics, be they Republican or Democrat, but it's nonetheless, I'm not sure free-for-alls always produce sound, measured results.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would agree, and I don't think a lot of people understand that about parties. They just, it goes back a long time to the beginning of the Republic. Factions, Washington, in his inaugural speech, or his farewell speech, I should say, to the nation, he decried parties, and that's kind of carried with us, and unfortunately, that's unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, but I think parties, to be fair to the president, to Washington, I think parties were very different creatures at that time.
Oh, they were. Right.
Yeah, parties were different creatures. I think the role of parties.
And they were concerned with uniting the nation.
Uniting the nation. And then, I would also make the argument, this I think augurs for your point, is that when you look at multi-tiered parties, whether in Europe or Israel or the UK, or as opposed to largely two-party systems. I look at the Australians, I look at the States, I'd even look at Canada. I think there was historically a drive to the center. Now, I think the real challenge in America today is as much about money as it is about FCC deregulation. I mean, I know that's not the focus of today, but when I look at the news, I'll never forget my father saying when he came home from World War II, everybody at the VFW watched NBC, CBS, or ABC, and whether you were then Protestant, Jewish, or Catholic, whether you were Democratic or Republican, you all watched the same news. You all heard the same news. And so you could all say a mug was a mug. At least you had a common definitional starting point against which to begin the discussion, as opposed to, watching, if you read the BBC or NPR, one of my conservative friends refers to it as Nancy Pelosi radio, when you read the Times and other friends of mine read the Wall Street Journal, and I remember, and I'm getting a little far afield, but the fact that during the Clinton administration, when people were talking about long-term health care, people weren't even discussing the same definitions.
No, that's right.
I mean, so like what we considered long-term health care, what we considered, post-op, what we considered diagnostic testing, people had profound disagreements. And from the post-World War II to Korean generation, I mean, when I think of Franklin Roosevelt, I think through Eisenhower, that there was a commonality in this nation. And what concerns to me is, I think three things have done irreparable damage. One is the content clause of the FCC. I think it's redistricting. Now all we do is district for safe. So the battle is in the primaries. Largely in terms of whether it's perhaps maybe not so much in New Jersey because they're both Republicans and Democrats sort of lean towards the center, but nationally the real interesting questions is in Georgia, is the governor of Georgia going to be knocked out by a Trump aficionado? Is former President Trump's candidate in Pennsylvania going to prevail against another establishment? So the point is, the battles become the primary, and so by definition, that battles within the echo chamber of right or center right, or left, center left, instead of center right, center left, and then the third area is obviously what I would perceive to be the cancerous effects of money and the longevity of the American electoral process. I mean, when you look at snap elections in the UK or Canada in the parliamentary system, I think that's the one area they have it right.
6 weeks or so.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, that was a very good point, and I think also, particularly with the three networks that used to be, right?
Oh,
I mean,
my
people
gosh,
would watch them. And now you have cable and you have the social media and talk radio and all these kinds of things all jumbled up. And it does make it very difficult for people to come to conclusions and make decisions and so forth.
Just even like, friends of mine that are more conservative than me, I mean, we're not, like, before we get into a discussion, we have to agree on the benchmarks of that, what does the word mean? And like, what are we talking about? Like, just like, gun control. I mean, that's like perhaps, and I remember the Jim Florio debate on assault weapons. Well, what constitutes an assault weapon and what's the definition? So I think that's also problematic, is that, and that's only exacerbated by money, and that's only exacerbated by primaries. So when people are talking unto themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. Also, I want to turn back to your administration. And during your administration, you signed a 22-bill package, package of bills called Restoring the Public Trust. And one of those, among many of the provisions of that particular package, one was the Clean Elections program. And that was modeled after the Arizona program.
Statute.
Ultimately, and I spoke with Speaker Roberts, about the former Speaker Roberts, about that. And ultimately,
who gets a large amount of credit for that, by the way.
Well, he pushed it,
Yeah,
but you signed it, though,
Yeah, and Joe, that wasn't universally acclaimed. But I apologize for interrupting.
That's okay. No, go ahead.
Yeah. No, but Joe was invaluable in shepherding that through.
Yeah. No question about it. But I mean, both of you. I mean, it was important. You had to support that, and 22 bills in package. That's pretty difficult to get through and get enacted under law. But ultimately, that clean elections program was deemed to be unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. In hindsight, would it have been better maybe to have a matching program like the gubernatorial public financing program rather than, the $10 denominations to up to a certain threshold, and then you get $100,000 and so forth? Well, maybe a better question is that,
I don't think that would have gone. I don't think that would have. Would that have been a safer, more incremental approach? The answer is yes, clearly. But I don't think that would have gone to the merits of what we were trying to accomplish.
Okay.
And there were really bright people who told us this was worth the proverbial Hail Mary pass. Who thought that if the court grappled with it, that this was worth the risk. I mean, I guess clearly, those conversations happened, and people wanted, and people recommended, but the thought is to maybe upend the system is too strong, but to provide significant change.
Yeah, and it certainly did, and it really, it was because of the decision in the Arizona case, which said that leveling the playing field is unconstitutional, which then, ours was modeled after Arizona and Maine, and so it was deemed unconstitutional as well. So,
but I think the law was in a state of flux. I don't think there was great clarity. It was. This is in and of itself would be a great focus for a symposium.
Oh, that's true.
And to think what states could do unto themselves, devoid, separate, and distinct from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now,
and that was what was frustrating about the court decision, because if the states are laboratories of healthy experimentation, the court just crushed it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's.
That's a very important point. Laboratories of.
Yeah, you say that ad nauseum, but then at the same time, if you sort of don't permit this leveling of playing field, but
well, that's the beauty of our system. The
laboratories
of democracy are the states. They try something, and if it works, you do it on a national level.
Except in this case,
except in this, right? Yeah. Exactly. But speaking of our gubernatorial program, you did participate both times. I guess, that you ran, and how important is gubernatorial public financing program continue still?
I think it's essential. I would like I would like to see more public engagement with the dollars. I think what happens is New Jersey, as Franklin said, is that valley of humility between the mountains of conceit of New York and Philadelphia. Right. I think there needs to be more engagement. I think there needs to be more engagement publicly. I think there needs to be more engagement with the media. I look at Pennsylvania, which is a very different state. I look at New York. I guess every state is sui generis, but it's. I don't think that there is as much attention or focus or engagement with the public on gubernatorial issues. And I would, one of the things that's always frustrated me, and this goes for both the Republicans and Democrats, is how is a governor going to govern with the state legislature? And so to me, what's always interesting is you have the governor runs and the state legislature is completely separate, but then there's, back then, there was a far more powerful and influential state organization. But the public doesn't understand what I think in large measure, what the interaction between the executive branch and the legislative branch. So exempting the judiciary, if there was a way to provide greater focus. Like, part of this is all right, when you look at national elections, you have, I remember the National Convention nominating
Sure.
Hillary
Yeah.
Clinton, and your reports from the various committees, the platform committee, and votes, and so what do? I remember Jacqueline sitting there and people voting and debating and whatever. But I knew for better or for worse, what the Democratic Party stood for. I know what the Republican Party stood for. The problem that I see respectfully in terms of New Jersey is that you have one talking head, whether it's Jim McGreevy or whether it's Governor Christie or any individual, but you don't have a sense of what the bloody party believes. So what's important in terms of New Jersey, what I would think is that I would be interested in seeing what was important to me is, well, what does Chuck Hardwick believe? What does Chuck Hightower believe? What does then Senate President Don DeFrancesco believe? So I think one of the things that I would have liked ELEC to do is to focus on, to a greater degree, or to require to a greater degree, the notion of party conventions. Because and I don't know how to do this, but it's not about one individual, or even if you have a brilliant chief of staff, or even if you have a great cabinet and a great chief of operations, but it's this. I think we miss something in New Jersey. If by metaphor we look, or by analogy, you look at the national campaign, you look at the debate, but to me, and maybe I'm too partisan of a person, but I look at this. I can remember Ronald Reagan's acceptance speech. I can remember Ted Kennedy's deferral. I can remember Bill Clinton's. So it's understanding where that person is within the context of not only politics but policy.
Is that also a product possibly of the fact that New Jersey is squeezed in between Philadelphia and New York media, and maybe that has.
But to go back to your point and I think it is a product of or geography. Yeah. But to go to your point is strengthening county organizations are one thing, but it's also strengthening the legislature, strengthening the legislative process. And what I don't see is I grew up and I remember the Al Bernsteins and Larry Weisses and people and the John Lynches and Matty Feldman. But what I don't see is on both, I remember, Moose Ferran and Walt Kavanaugh and Republicans and Democrats. What I think would benefit New Jersey is a greater focus in the election process and in the financing process on also focusing in on the larger state organization. So I think what we've done is we've done some good things on county organizations, bolstering those county organizations. But at the end of the day, you want to drive not unanimity, but you want to drive consensus, and also you want to have greater transparency so you understand what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans on X, on Y, what are the nuances, what are the clear points of differentiation, what are the areas where they're roughly analogous. Yeah. And I don't see that in New Jersey as much as I do in, I used to watch C-SPAN, covering state parties, and I think that's an important function.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people watch C-SPAN, but that's it's an important.
Exactly. You sound like President Obama at the White House Correspondents' Club.
I want to turn for a moment to pay-to-play.
Sure.
Pay-to-play law, and of course you were instrumental in that. And one of the things with pay-to-play that you were in favor of one state law, which applied across the board to local communities, municipal, county, counties and municipal committees and so forth, and also to to the state. And you're very much in favor of that one state law.
Well, it
What
provides
happened after you
uniformity.
after you left the governor's office, that there were a whole bunch of executive orders and changes, fair and open,
Yep.
loophole that was created,
Yep.
local ordinances and so forth. And that's really created a situation where it's very complicated, very convoluted. It's very hard to enforce, it's very hard to comply with on
Yep.
the side. And I would imagine that you would like to see the pay-to-play
No, I
law
think
go back to one state law.
simple is easy.
Yeah, right,
Simple is clear.
yeah.
And I look, to be fair, there are legitimate complaints against how that simplicity or quote unquote clarity has a disproportionately negative impact to certain persons by virtue of how they do business. So there's not a naivete. I mean, I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I think it accomplishes its goals.
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind pay-to-play is really good. Connect the dots between a
Yep.
contribution and a contract. But the way that it evolved in terms of all these different
Yeah.
executive orders is, I know from our point of view, I think,
And then but it also has, the simplicity also has a value against prosecution. So, what you also need to be concerned with is, I served at the privilege of being an assistant prosecutor, but what you also have to be concerned with is, in the political process, I think unfortunately more so today, is that prosecution for ostensibly, if you have clearer rules that prohibit and people abide by that rules, you have less likely will you have inappropriate prosecutorial decisions.
now turning back.
So I just wanted to flag that. I think that's
sure.
also a point, because I think there's a sense now in America, rightly or wrongly, that prosecutions are almost an extension of the political process in certain areas. And I think the irony is that the clarity on pay-to-play protects us all.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And
Yeah.
we totally agree with it being simplified. I mean, that's one of our
Yeah.
recommendations, is just one state law and
Yep.
get rid of fair and open and get
Yep.
rid of all the local ordinances and all the differences
Yeah.
would clear
Yeah.
things up for a lot of people. Now, just returning for a moment to the 22 package of bills.
Yep.
One of the things that went along with that was, of course, a $2 million appropriation to the commission, which was there to implement the law, and that's very unusual, because most of the time, you have bills going through and there's no appropriation, and there's no thought.
I had to put up with Fred Herman. No.
Yeah, Fred Herman is our executive director before me. For 25 years.
Yes.
And he's very respected and very well-known individual in the state.
Fred was, I mean, not only a dear friend. I mean, I knew Fred, I think, from being in the Republican majority office at the time.
Right.
But Fred and I had been friends forever, and Fred understood the scope of the charge before him and said, if we're going to make this work, we have to bolster the commission.
Yeah, and he was always pushing for that, and you responded to that as governor, and it was very helpful, because we were finally able to increase our number of people that were employed.
The investigators, sure.
Our investigators and our lawyers and so forth, and compliance officers. And also started us on the way of our
It's just like
computerization.
there's a certain amount of it where people look at ELEC almost like the IRS. Like, if I starve them, maybe their function will dissipate. It's just like, I don't think that's how it works.
No, very often I wonder what the impression of us is out there. The perception of ELEC.
But I think the reputation of ELEC is sound and is good. Not only your leadership, but I think people understand the importance of it.
Right.
That being said, it's important to have the most robust ELEC, to have the most democratic experience, to encourage best practices.
One of the problems is our name.
Yep.
Because election law enforcement.
Yep.
Everybody thinks that That's all we do.
Yep.
But our main mission is disclosure,
Yep.
of course, which is
Yeah.
which
No,
is,
I appreciate that. But
very-
you're right. I never thought of that. That the name in and of itself makes it sound like a division of the Attorney General's
it
office.
does.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with that all the time with people calling in with thinking that we're a prosecutor or something, and which part of our job is to do that.
Yeah.
But disclosure does help our enforcement.
Yeah, you're on the beneficial side as opposed to the punitive side of the function.
Absolutely. Well, I think I don't have any more questions. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
So, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that if the commission and I think in years moving forward could play maybe a more robust role with the legislative process. And so what my sense is, and my dear friend Joe and others, I think there's an opportunity to engage the legislature insofar as the legislature can reach out to the public. So I think there's a natural tendency among all, well, let me just say for me, to think of ELEC in terms of the gubernatorial campaigns and to think of the give and take on that scope. But I also think that there's an opportunity to talk about the importance of participating in democracy, engaging in local state legislative races, sort of drilling down and being part of the legislative process. And I just think that both in terms of the state legislative process and state parties, that ELEC could be perceived as being a partner rather than an adversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important, is just, whether it's addressing a caucus or whether being part and parcel or education, part of that is, and I think the easiest way to do it is through the state parties. So the same way that we've supported stronger county parties to support stronger state parties, the same argument that you do away with, the polar extremes through organizations, I think you provide for greater, more thoughtful public policy if state parties are encouraged.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I would like to see the state parties be stronger. Unfortunately, historically, it's always been the county organizations that have been the stronger aspect or stronger.
But I
part
think
of
there's an aspect of funding and perhaps language which would amend and strengthen the state organizations that could be considered.
Yeah, good point.
Because if my thought is if county organizations or a county organization per se becomes more powerful than a state organization, it tips the balance. Yeah. And I think, this is maybe simplistic, but to the extent that a state organization can play a role in not only leveling the awful sort of money chase, but be a repository of good ideas, good public policy, good legislation, so much the better. And I think largely we've focused on the county versus local, but I think what I perceive to be is there's a diminishment of the state party, particularly with the advent of dark money, that somebody needs to in part correct.
Actually, I do have one more
Sure.
question. And I guess it's because I'm also from Middlesex County, from Milltown, and I remember
David B. Craybill.
David Craybill, right? And then Ed Craybill is,
Yes.
Now you're showing your age.
Yeah, right, exactly. But he was mayor for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
Of Milltown, and he was, I always remember him because he would always find out the one person that wasn't going to vote for him.
Yeah.
And you go over and
he was the Brian Stack of his day.
Exactly. He
exactly.
was. But what I wanted to get at is, I always heard that you as mayor would actually go around and drive around and look for the potholes. And I think that's very important. I think more mayors ought to be doing that. Because you find out what's really going on, And what were some of the
I think it
problems?
was like pathological, but anyway, yeah, no, and then I became an expert. So like, I loved every week, once a week, every year, once a week, I hang out with the DPW, and I get to know between hot patch and cold patch and this kind of patch, and what adheses to asphalt and what
Right.
doesn't. But it's like anything. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. But I love being Woodbridge is a great community, and yeah, no, it's what I loved about Woodbridge for me. It was a melting pot, and there were people from all over the world there, and a lot of people from Hudson County and Essex
Yeah.
County, trying to find their piece of the universe. But it's doing service as well, and people notice. I was the bane of PSE&G's existence. When they dug up a road, I would like, does this look like this road? And they would like, what am I not seeing that you
Yeah.
see, or what am I, seeing that you don't see?
That's very
And
important.
I would be like, at the same time, but it's just driving excellence in whatever it is you do.
And that's very important. I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned John Lynch before, and he used to always say most important thing was to pave the roads.
Yep.
Let people pave the roads.
Pave the roads.
Right.
And snow removal. I remember when I was first running for governor in '97, I was down in Camden, and my friend Wayne Bryant, Senator Bryant, invited me down to this church, and it was local Baptist church in Camden, and it must have been in January, February, and so the pastor walks me outside and walks me into the street, and he says, "What's this?" I'm like thinking to myself, like, it's snow, but I'm like, there must be something more to this. I think it's a trick question. I said, "Pastor, it's snow." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, is this on the street in Woodbridge today?" And I said, "No, sir, it's not." He goes, "It's on the street here in Camden." And he goes, "My parishioners have back then left Camden, but they maintain a fealty to this house of worship because of their parents or their spirituality." And he goes, "This is what I'm grappling with." He goes, and I'll never forget what he said. He goes, "Why do people think that I want anything different from what any other family wants, whether it's the quality of my schools, whether it's my roads
Sure.
paved, whether my snow removed? I want the same things." And it was just such a point of simple clarity for me.
Well, local government is the essence of
Yep.
government, I think, right? I mean,
Yes, yeah, local government is like, with a proverb. That's why I love my friend Brian Stack, Mayor Stack in Union City is to me, Brian is, I don't know, like I'll literally walk through Union City and I know all the street lights are on maximum, the roads are paved, the curbs are well done, and you can tell there's pride in the quality of the work. And at the end of the day, that's what people want, and that's the goodness. I mean, at the end of the day, it's community. I think going back in time, what's the level of government that most effectuates change in people's lives for the better? It's local government.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's why what you do, what ELEC does, is so critically important, because it's providing access in this world of money and noise and messages, providing access to ordinary Americans to do what it is that our founding fathers wanted,
Yeah.
which is to be fully engaged in this experiment we call democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, this is the history of the commission project, and I've been fortunate to sit down for a
thank you.
conversation with former Governor McGreevy, and thank you very much for
No,
sitting
thank
down
you
with
so
me.
much for your time.
Right.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Good.